There are photographs that should not be possible, not because they depict something supernatural, not because they show something the camera could not capture, but because what they show, standing calmly in full daylight, surrounded by ordinary people in ordinary clothes, is a civilization that has no place in the history we were given. These photographs were taken in Chicago in 1893, and they show a city within a city. A vast, gleaming metropolis of marble columns, cathedral domes, reflecting pools, and monumental archways stretching further than the eye could follow. Buildings so enormous they dwarfed everything around them. Facades so ornate and so precisely carved, they appeared to have weathered centuries of existence. They called it the White City. And then, within 2 years of those photographs being taken, it was gone. Not abandoned, not repurposed, not left to slowly decay the way most things do when civilization moves on. It was burned, demolished, erased, returned to nothing so completely that today, standing on that same ground in Chicago, you would find no trace that it ever existed at all. No ruins, no salvaged stone, no foundations preserved beneath the earth, just absence. And once you begin asking why, genuinely asking, not accepting the convenient explanation, something deeply strange begins to emerge from the official record. Because the story we were given about the White City does not hold together. The more carefully you examine it, the more it begins to feel less like history and more like a story that was written to replace one. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition was officially convened to celebrate 400 years since Columbus arrived in the Americas. That was the stated purpose. A celebration, a commemoration. But commemorations do not typically require 600 acres of constructed land on the edge of Lake Michigan. They do not require 14 main buildings, each one among the largest structures in the country at the time. They do not require a transportation network, a functioning canal system, an electricity grid, one of the first of its kind in the world, a sewage system, police force, fire department, post office, and a functioning city government. This was not a fair. Whatever it was a city, and it appeared in under 2 years. Think about what that timeline actually demands. The site chosen was essentially undeveloped marshland on the southern edge of Chicago. Unstable ground, poor drainage, no existing infrastructure. The kind of terrain that would give modern engineers reason to pause before beginning a single small building. And yet, from that ground, in roughly 24 months, rose a complex that the world had never seen before and has arguably never seen since. The main building, the Manufactures and Liberal Arts Building, was the largest enclosed space in human history at that time. It covered more than 30 acres under a single roof. 30 acres, under one roof, built on marshland, in 2 years. The official explanation is labor. Tens of thousands of workers. Around-the-clock construction. The raw force of industrial America applied at maximum intensity. But even granting every possible advantage, unlimited budget, unlimited labor, unlimited materials, the speed and precision of what was built does not correspond to what was possible in 1893. Modern construction experts who have studied the architectural drawings closely note that many of the structural decisions made in those buildings reflected engineering knowledge that was, by the official timeline, still years away from being formally understood. The math was right before the math existed. And then there is the appearance of the buildings themselves. Because this is where the official explanation begins to quietly collapse. The structures of the White City were not designed to look modern. They were not designed to look like the Chicago of 1893, which was itself a city of considerable development. They were designed to look ancient, deliberately, precisely, unmistakably ancient. Roman colonnades, Greek pediments, Renaissance domes, Baroque ornamentation carved in extraordinary detail across every surface. The aesthetic was not borrowed from the contemporary world. It was borrowed from a world that had supposedly ended 1500 years earlier. The question no one in official history seems willing to sit with is simple. Why? Why would a civilization at the height of its industrial confidence, steam engines, electricity, steel, the railroad, choose to celebrate its achievements inside buildings that look like they belong to a civilization from before the birth of Christ? The standard answer is that it was a stylistic choice. Neoclassicism was fashionable. The architects admired antiquity. It was an aesthetic decision. But aesthetic decisions do not explain the scale. They do not explain why every single major structure across 600 acres shared the same visual language. They do not explain why the buildings were aged in appearance, designed to look weathered, established, permanent, when by definition they were brand new. You do not build something to look ancient unless you are trying to make it look like it has always been there. And once that thought enters your mind, it becomes very difficult to remove. The material the buildings were made from is itself a point of significant controversy. Officially, the White City was constructed from a composite called staff, a mixture of plaster of Paris, cement, glycerin, and jute fiber. A temporary material, lightweight, inexpensive, easy to mold into complex shapes, not built to last. This is the explanation history offers for why nothing remained. It was always temporary. It was always meant to come down. But people who attended the fair did not experience it as temporary. Visitors from around the world described the buildings as feeling ancient, solid, impenetrable. Writers who walked the grounds repeatedly used words like eternal, timeless, permanent. One visitor wrote that standing inside the Great Hall felt like standing inside something that had existed long before he was born and would exist long after he was gone. That is not how people describe plaster and jute fiber. And photographs taken at close range of the buildings show detail, carved ornamentation, textural depth, surface aging, that is genuinely difficult to reconcile with a material applied by workers over a period of months. The level of craft visible in those images corresponds to decades of skilled work at minimum. In some cases, it corresponds to something far older than that. There is a recurring pattern in this kind of historical examination. The official explanation for something is given. It is superficially plausible. And then when you apply it directly to the physical evidence, a gap opens. A gap between what the explanation predicts and what the evidence actually shows. And that gap, in the case of the White City, is enormous. Now consider what happened next. Because the end of the White City is, in many ways, more disturbing than its beginning. The fair closed in October of 1893. Within months, a series of fires broke out across the grounds. The casino burned. The cold storage building burned. The following summer, the great terminal station burned. By 1894, a massive fire tore through the fairgrounds and consumed what remained of the main structures. Officially, the fires were accidents, the result of squatters who had moved into the abandoned buildings after the fair closed, lit fires for warmth, left them unattended. It is possible. Fires spread easily in large wooden structures, and there was certainly a population of displaced people in Chicago at the time following the economic panic of 1893. But the totality of the destruction is difficult to attribute purely to accident, because the fires did not leave ruins. They left nothing. No substantial masonry remained. No structural elements survived that might have been repurposed. The most architecturally significant complex in American history at that time was reduced in a matter of months to cleared ground. And then the cleared ground was converted into what is now Jackson Park. A public park. Pleasant. Unremarkable. With no monument, no preserved element, no physical acknowledgement that anything of significance once stood there. The erasure was complete. This is where the question shifts from the architectural to the historical. Because the White City was not the only structure of its kind. The World's Fair movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries produced similar complexes in city after city around the world. Philadelphia in 1876, Paris in 1889, Buffalo in 1901, St. Louis in 1904, San Francisco in 1915, each one a vast neoclassical city built in months and demolished shortly after. Each one documented in photographs that show the same impossible grandeur, the same ancient aesthetic applied to supposedly temporary structures, the same sudden, complete disappearance. Paris retained the Eiffel Tower from its 1889 exposition, but almost nothing else survived. The Palace of Machines, a structure of almost incomprehensible scale, was demolished in 1910. Gone. San Francisco's Panama Pacific International Exposition of 1915 produced a complex so beautiful that city residents campaigned desperately to have it preserved. The Palace of Fine Arts was the only structure that survived. Everything else was demolished, and even the Palace of Fine Arts, today a rebuilt concrete replica, is not the original structure. The original was allowed to decay and was replaced in the 1960s. The pattern across every single World's Fair is identical. Construction of an impossible scale in an impossible time frame. A brief period of public access. Then systematic demolition and near-total erasure. When a pattern repeats that consistently across different cities, different countries, different decades, it stops being coincidence. Patterns that consistent are the result of decisions. Someone kept deciding to tear these things down. There is a theory, not fringe, not invented from nothing, but drawn from the architectural anomalies themselves, that the World's Fair buildings were not constructed, that they were inherited, that what the official record describes as a building process was in reality a restoration process, that the structures already existed in some form, remnants of an older civilization whose architectural knowledge dwarfed anything the 19th century could claim, and that what the photographs document is not construction but renovation, cleaning, repainting, repurposing for public display, and then demolition. Because once the public had been given their brief controlled exposure to these places, the decision was made to remove them permanently from the landscape. This theory explains the speed. You cannot build what the White City showed in 2 years. But you can restore it in 2 years if the bones are already there. It explains the aesthetic. If you inherit a Roman-era complex, it looks Roman because it is Roman. You do not choose the style. The style is what was left to you. It explains the material anomaly. If the surfaces visible in the photographs show depth and age that does not correspond to fresh staff mixture, that is because beneath the staff, or instead of it in some places, there was something genuinely old. And it explains the demolition. Because if what was being displayed was not a constructed fair, but an inherited artifact, a remnant of something the official timeline could not accommodate, then removing it after the public had seen it was not waste. It was necessity. The deeper you go into the history of these structures, the more a particular discomfort begins to settle in. Not the discomfort of finding something frightening, but the discomfort of finding something that has been very carefully not looked at. The architects of the White City are celebrated in history books. Daniel Burnham, Frederick Law Olmsted, Louis Sullivan, who famously criticized the neoclassical aesthetic of the fair and predicted it would set American architecture back decades. Sullivan was right, by the way. The neoclassical style that the White City popularized dominated American civic architecture for the next 40 years. But no one asks where Burnham learned to design at that scale. No one asks how Olmsted planned a landscape system of that complexity on unstable marshland in that time frame. No one interrogates the gap between what these men had built before the fair and what they supposedly built for it. Before 1893, Daniel Burnham had designed significant buildings, but nothing remotely approaching the scale of the White City. After 1893, he became one of the most influential urban planners in American history, shaping the design of Washington, Chicago, San Francisco, and Manila. The White City was not a project that launched his career. It was a rupture in it. A sudden, unexplained elevation in capability and scale that he never fully replicated again. As if, for a brief period, he had access to something. And then he did not. What was the White City then? What was really happening on those 600 acres between 1891 and 1894? The honest answer is that we do not know. And that is not a comfortable place to sit, because we were given the impression that we did know. We were given a complete, detailed, confident explanation. Fair, temporary buildings, celebration, fire, demolition, end. But the explanation does not fit the evidence, not fully, not cleanly. And the places where it does not fit are not small details. They are structural. They go to the heart of what was built and why. What we can say with certainty is this: something extraordinary existed on the southern edge of Chicago for a period of roughly 3 years. Something that the most educated, well-traveled people of that era found overwhelming in its grandeur. Something that engineers today look at in photographs and find difficult to explain. Something that was documented obsessively in images and writing, and then physically erased so completely that the ground it stood on gives no indication it was ever there. That combination, extraordinary significance, obsessive documentation, and total physical erasure, is not accidental. That is a decision. Perhaps many decisions, made by many people, over many years. And decisions imply reasons. Reasons that were never recorded, or reasons that were recorded somewhere and have not been made available. This is what ancient history looks like from the inside. Not fallen temples in remote jungles, not hieroglyphs on buried walls. Sometimes it looks like a park in Chicago where children play in summer. Sometimes the most hidden layer of history is the one sitting directly beneath the surface of the present, covered not by centuries of sediment, but by a thin layer of official explanation and the assumption that the questions were already answered. The White City burned. That much is certain. But what burned with it? What knowledge? What inheritance? What evidence of a world that does not fit the timeline we were given? That question has never been seriously asked by anyone with the authority to investigate it. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the most effective way to erase something is not to destroy every trace of it. It is to destroy enough of it that what remains can be explained away. To leave the photographs but remove the buildings. To preserve the names of the architects but obscure what they actually knew. To give the thing a complete and satisfying official story, so that the people who sense something wrong about that story have no physical evidence left to point to. The White City no longer exists, but the photographs remain. And photographs, unlike buildings, are very difficult to demolish. They sit there in archive after archive, showing something that should not have been possible. Showing a civilization that appeared from nowhere, performed its impossible existence for a few years in front of millions of witnesses, and then vanished without physical trace. Waiting, perhaps, for someone to finally ask the right questions. The ruins are gone, but the silence where they stood is louder than anything official history has ever said about them. And here is what unsettles me most. We are not talking about a civilization from 3,000 years ago. We are not talking about ruins buried under centuries of sediment in a remote desert. We are talking about 1893, within living memory of people alive today, documented obsessively by cameras, newspapers, and eyewitnesses from around the world, and still, almost entirely erased. If something that recent can disappear that completely, What else has been removed from the record? What older layers exist beneath the layers we have already lost? How deep does this actually go? Those are the questions this channel exists to ask, and we are only getting started. If you want to keep pulling at these threads, the buried cities, the impossible structures, the timelines that do not add up, subscribe to Silent Chronos. Every video goes deeper, and the deeper we go, the stranger history becomes.